All right, so excited to get started here. We're going to be talking about leadership in the context of some principles that can help us in no matter what, but also in the context of self-leadership, which is kind of an interesting idea as we try and identify, okay, what are the personal changes that I need to make so that I can enable others? And this can be true whether or not you are currently considered a leader or a manager or whatever officially in work or other situations, but also leadership translates in so many other different aspects of life beyond just work as well. But the majority of the people that I end up working with are in an engineering technology domain to some degree. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we get going here. Can I get a thumbs up to make sure that this is showing up well for people? Okay. Very good. So, and throughout the time together, I use a technique that I call quick chat, and it's pretty simple. Essentially, I just ask a question, and we use the chat function here in Zoom. And so I'm going to ask the question, but don't actually press enter to submit it until I do like a quick countdown. It's just kind of fun to see everyone's responses come in simultaneously instead of being that awkward one person who answers. And just hanging out there. So the question to start, I'm always interested, sometimes we get some international people in these sessions, but where are you joining us from? So just type that into the chat. Curious where people are joining us from. I know some of you, so some people on the West Coast and Midwest and others, but where are you? So give you just another 10 seconds to type that in. So, and we'll go 3, 2, 1, press enter. Let's see. Utah, California, Minnesota, Seattle, Detroit Metro, and Bremerton, Washington. Okay, very good. So a lot of West Coast, but we got Utah and Detroit and Minnesota as well. So thanks, no matter where you're joining us, this is exciting. So we'll be doing that a few times throughout the session. If we haven't met or you don't know anything about me, I founded More Than Engineering about 3.5 years ago. My technical background is in mechanical, software, manufacturing, engineering, and got into engineering leadership. This year in 2023, became a father of 4. We welcomed our latest little one to the family, and I love getting outside, hiking. I'm an avid reader. So I could talk books all day for anyone who wants to. And then the last couple of years, like many people around the country and the world, got into pickleball. And so that's kind of a new fun thing for me. But really what I really love doing and where a lot of my passion lies is helping people unlock their potential to create change in themselves, which then creates change in their organizations and in those that they impact in different ways. And helping people to find those shifts and those changes is just so fun. And so I sometimes say I get to have a front row seat to seeing people succeed and change and reach their goals. It's just so much fun for me. And so as we start today, my promise and my hope for you is that by the end of the session, you're going to have a framework to evaluate kind of different areas of your current level of leadership, no matter what your title is. And I'll also give you some more resources and opportunities to continue to grow beyond this session. Some things that we'll talk about in this session, and I may share some other things in the follow-up as well. But my invitation to you is to be present, right? So to engage with the session, with the content, to put the cell phone away, unless that's what you're tuning in with. Actively participate, but close out other tabs or programs or other things, because if you're going to give this time to yourself, you may as well make the most of this time and just see what you discover. And what I hope is that you'll be actively looking for changes and things that you can do, because it's one thing to like get information and ideas. It's another thing to then put that into action. So identify the actions and the changes you can make. And I'm going to try and present it in a way that encourages you to take action along the way. So that's my invitation for you, is to be present and get the most out of this time that we spend together. So we jump in. I want to start with a little bit of bad news. Okay. Engagement at work is low. This comes from the Gallup report of 2022, which means most of the data was in 2021, but this is the latest report that they have right now. And this particular number, like the percentage of people engaged, has been relatively stable over the last few years and been kind of the low to mid 30 percentage points. So you think about the number of people who are engaged at work, and this is in the US, it's even lower. You can see the global number is 21%. So it's higher in the US and globally, but a third of people being engaged at work is not great, right? So that means 2/3 of people are disengaged to some degree. That's not the kind of level what we're looking for. There's a lot of that. Other aspects of this report is that people who have worries, worry about big things in their lives. Over 40% of people are worrying about things in their lives, often related to their career, but also other personal changes or challenges they're going through. We all have big things that we're dealing with in various ways, whether that's things in our personal life, in our career, people we love and care about, other changes and challenges that we're dealing with. So that most of us, I would actually guess that probably that number might be a little bit underrepresented if I were guessing. This chart comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is looking at the fourth quarter of 2022 and on some productivity measures. And so you can see that productivity is down and costs are up compared to the previous. We understand some of the reasons why costs are up. Costs of almost everything are up these days, but interestingly enough, that, so one of those things is labor costs and for organizations, but the increased labor cost is not actually resulting in more productivity, even though hours worked are up and hourly compensation, but the real hourly compensation is down, which is so these aren't kind of the things that we're really looking for, not the results that we want. So the lesson to me is that there aren't that many people who feel valued and supported in the workplace, and this can lead to lower productivity, satisfaction, and also think about innovation, right? In an engineering and technical context, we're looking for people who can innovate and create change. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, do another one of these quick chats, just to throw in the chat, why do you think engagement, innovation, and productivity are low these days? If you were to point to, just choose one thing, why you think. And again, put your answer in the chat, but don't press enter to submit it until we do a countdown to give people a little bit of time and then see those answers come in here. So curious what your perspective, insights, or experience is. Maybe you can think personally, why have I had low engagement or productivity in the past, or in the teams that I've worked with or seen various times, right? We'll give you about 10 more seconds to enter in something, and then we'll go 3, 2, 1, go. All right, burnout, absolutely. Bureaucracy, COVID was a big deal the last few years. Stressful economy situations, absolutely. Lack of satisfaction and recognition, certainly. Quiet quitting has been a buzzword last little while, connected with the Great Resignation idea, where there were legitimately a lot more people quitting their jobs, and still kind of are. Future uncertainty, absolutely. Lack of listening, very good. Global shortages, yeah. So it's hard to point to just one thing. All of these things have an effect. But if I were to give my take on the conversations I'm having with people and some of the things I'm seeing, is that I might summarize some of this in that we're often too transactional with how we're approaching our relationships in general, and certainly our work relationships. Maybe leaders are just delegating, say, hey, get this done, but they're only being transactional, like here's something to do, right? And then kind of like you're checking out at a grocery store or a restaurant or something, right? We make the transaction, cool, we're done. and we did the thing, check the box, move along. Some people are still trying to get away with, I think, the do as I say, not as I do approach, right? And so leadership isn't always modeled appropriately. And so we're trying to promote values, ideas, ways of working, and whatnot, while not actually aligning that with how we are operating personally. So there's a misalignment or an incongruence there. And then perhaps connected or overshadowing all of that is, I think there's a sense that we're losing touch with ourselves. This is maybe on the self-leadership side, and our purpose, even if we, or if we've even identified our purpose and what we care about and the things that are important to us. Like, do we have a purpose? I talk to people, and a majority of people don't have kind of a deeper purpose and reason and a why for what they're trying to accomplish, and a deeper level of motivation. And even those that do, a lot of those have kind of lost touch with that, right? And so in an engineering context, we might see something like this. Maybe you've seen something. We can take a great engineer and ask them, and they were a highly productive, high-performing engineer on the team. And then we asked them and said, hey, can you lead the team? Okay, sure, they're going to give that a shot. So we throw them into the fire, but we give them little support, right? And they do their best. But many engineers or technology professionals don't realize how much of a shift it really is to lead others versus what they were doing previously, was trying to do great engineering work, but primarily as an individual contributor, right? And so we actually unintentionally set them up to fail. No one's doing this on purpose, usually, but unintentionally we're setting them up to fail. And so the emperor might say, your failure is complete, right? For any Star Wars fans out there. And this is sad, right? Like, we're taking a highly productive engineer, and then we're setting up to fail in a new context. We're not giving them the opportunity to really create the impact that they can. And I don't think that's because they don't have the potential or the ability. Just we haven't set things up for them to actually move through that transition. So the good news in my mind is that we can do something about this. We can actually, starting with ourselves, we can take responsibility to change how we lead ourselves, right? Which then, as an individual leader or just an individual, we can transform then how we lead and influence others. And this can help improve collaboration and innovation in so many different ways. And don't forget, leadership happens in so many different contexts beyond just in the workplace, right? Certainly at work, but also leadership is at home with our loved ones, our spouses and partners, our children, and others. It's leadership happens in our communities with our neighbors, and community actions and involvement that we have, or impact that we want to have, happens with our friends and the kind of people we spend time with and the influence we have in their lives. And also it happens in just like these small moments as we cross paths with fellow humans in life, right? Like, we have impact and leadership in everywhere that we go and everything that we do. Okay, and so it's just a reminder that leadership happens in so many other contexts beyond just what we're primarily focusing on is in the workplace. But I truly believe that it starts with this idea of self-leadership, which then it expands to, someone might lead a team and an organization, but at the core of that is how we lead ourselves. If we can't lead ourselves, how can we expect to appropriately and effectively lead others, right? And the whole idea of leadership is leading. We aren't waiting for someone else to tell us what to do and why we should do it. We are taking the lead. And so as far as developing yourself, if you're waiting for someone else to say, hey, this is what you might consider doing to help grow your career or grow this skill or that skill, or some changes you need to be able to work with people better, in the end, you are the one that needs to take responsibility for that. And we want to work with others to get the feedback and the insights and the help and support along the way, but we need to take that responsibility for ourselves. So that's kind of the core idea. As I'm going to talk about a number of different leadership principles and ideas to create impact across teams and organizations, but in the end, it comes down to what can I change individually, because that's what we have an effect over, right? So I want to do another one of these quick chats. Thinking about this idea of self-leadership, just give me a number on a scale from 1 to 5. 5 would be the highest level. How would you rate your current level of self-leadership? And I know this is perhaps a vulnerable question to ask, but it's worth, and it's also one I think that fluctuates based on recent experiences, right? If I were to give you a number for myself, a few days ago, I'd probably give myself a 1. The last few days, it's been a little bit better, and so it changes. I was having a rough day the other day, and so my self-leadership was not at a high level, and that was interesting for me as I was in the midst of preparing this presentation and dealing with that. So we're not expecting perfection, but we are just expecting an awareness out of ourselves and those that we interact with. So go ahead, do 3, 2, 1, go. I'm curious what you say. Throw it in the chat. Yeah, so a number of different people, and there's a range, as is natural for maybe a lot of people, right? Probably no one's going to give themselves a full number 5 or a full number 1, but 2 to 4, I see some half numbers in there. This was a scale of 1 to 5, not from 1 to 10, by the way, just so you know, and that was on purpose. But yeah, and that number doesn't need to mean anything to anyone else besides yourself. And so what we're going to do here is I'm going to go over 3 different areas to help increase connection to those that we lead and influence. By leading ourselves, we're actually want to create greater levels of connections with those that we interact with. And so there are 3 different things, and I'm going to build this out through a simple Venn diagram. And the first area that I think that we can grow in self-leadership and connecting with others is the idea of awareness. And I'm going to connect this also to the principles of mindsets. And for a number of people on the call here have worked with me and are aware of some of the mindset ideas that I share. But I just believe that so much of what we do starts with our mindsets. And just to give a brief definition of mindset, as we move forward here, we can define this in a number of ways. We can talk about this like a set of attitudes that we hold, how we view people and challenges in our environment, right? Beliefs that orient the way that we handle situations, how we're sorting out what's going on and how we react to that, what we should do, right? So we would think that, looking at a model like this, that our mindsets kind of create the foundation of and fuel our behaviors and actions. But a lot of people, when we're trying to make changes in our lives, whether that's a leadership or a skill capability or a health transformation or anything, right? A lot of times what we try and do is we try and prescribe actions and behaviors at the level of behavior. These are all the things that I need to be doing differently. But what we do when we only focus on those actions and behaviors, we're actually leaving behind our mindsets, our attitudes, our beliefs that were really driving those original actions in the first place. And so when our mindsets are left behind, our actions and behaviors might change for a time, but we're going to jump right back to what those were. Most likely, it's not going to be sustainable change. And so if instead we can actually, along with our actions, behaviors, shift our mindsets as well, then we're setting ourselves up like on a firmer foundation to be able to make these more sustainable changes. So it's almost acts like a tether. If we can change our mindsets, our identities, our beliefs, then our actions and behaviors will follow along with that. There's just a couple of analogies to think about this idea of awareness and mindsets. We can think about kind of an internal operating system, right? Like we have these neural connections Our neurons are literally firing, and we are, and I love the axiom that neurons that fire together wire together. And so every action and thought that we have, that we build up, that we make greater, we are wiring those neurons to do more of again. And so we're constantly training our brain and building an internal operating system. I also like to think about mindsets as the lenses through which we see the world, right? Do we have the right prescription, or do we have a foggy view? Are we seeing real reality? And are we seeing the best in other people? Or are we seeing kind of a foggy view that is only what we want to believe instead of really what's true, right? Because if we have the wrong data, or we are filtering that data to be wrong because of our mindsets, then we can't actually act appropriately sometimes. And so what this causes then is sometimes we, like that model before where we were just shifting our behaviors, but our mindsets were left behind. Sometimes it's like we say, hey, I want to make this change, and we start making behaviors, we put our foot on the gas, but because our mindsets are still left back, or there may be internal beliefs or assumptions that we actually have our foot on the brake at the same time, right? So we're trying to move, but we're holding ourselves back, and we may not even be aware of what is holding us back, which is kind of disappointing. So we need to find ways to get aware, become aware of this. I was talking earlier about purpose and people maybe being disconnected or not even having a purpose. This idea of awareness is also about increasing our intentionality, right? So as an individual, me, do you have meaningful goals that and a purpose behind those goals? Your why, very much popularized by Simon Sinek and others. Do you have core values that you've identified as things that are important to you? These are just examples. You don't have to necessarily check off every single one of these, but these are examples of what you can do to be intentional. Perhaps creating a personal mission or vision statement can be helpful. At minimum, just like, are you aware of who you are trying to become, right? The goals of the change of the kind of person that you're trying to become, and therefore maybe the dent you want to make in the universe, right? I'll show you an example of one of the ways that I attempt to do this and remind myself of some of these things. And I stole this from a friend of mine who does some similar work that I was inspired by. I created kind of a really easy one-page thing with some visuals and some things for me personally, right? So I identified some core values for me and also some images that represent some things that are really important to me in terms of growth and impact and faith that's important to me, and truth and significance, and put it in a little acronym to make it easier for me to remember. And I set this up as my screensaver on my computer, so I look at it pretty much every day, right? So that's one way that I'm attempting to consistently remind myself of these deeper reasons. And so how do you do that, right? One of the other things that I really care about that I talked about earlier is this belief that I have that every single one of us is full of like this potential energy. It just needs to be unlocked and unleashed, right? We're full of fuel and opportunity to propel great things. And my passion and a lot of what drives me is to help unlock that potential. And awareness helps us to do that. It almost helps us mine that energy inside of us, right? So I want to give each of you just a little bit of time during this session today to identify a change that is meaningful to you, right? So I'm going to give you 60 seconds here to be a little bit reflective. Take out a journal, even just like a sticky note or anything that you can write on. I would recommend something analog if possible instead of digital, but brainstorm maybe 3 to 5 change ideas that you could make, right? And then ask yourself, which of these might make the biggest impact in your life and opportunity. And then bonus is to identify, we were talking about that foot on the gas, foot on the brake idea. what might be some hidden commitments or beliefs or assumptions that might actually be putting my foot on that brake that I need to identify. And you may or may not have enough time to dig into this as much, but I at least want to get you started and encourage you to spend some more time, perhaps after the session, to go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds here of me being quiet to spend some reflective time on that. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that. You don't often get 60 seconds of nice quiet during a webinar presentation like this, but again, I encourage you to take what you started there, maybe build that out a little bit more later, but at least want to get you started. A little momentum can go a long way. Give you an example of what these actually making these changes can look like. And I know there's a lot of text here, so I apologize. Kent, this is someone that I worked with recently. Kent had a lot to say. He's a high-level software architect and also a business owner and entrepreneur. And he talked about we worked together and I was able to have the pleasure of seeing some major breakthroughs that he made. It was so fun to see. And through some of the processes that I introduced a little bit here to uncover some of these root causes of these blocks that actually allowed him to make some forward momentum and learn a new pattern of ways of working with people that he was actually self-sabotaging himself in the past. And so he was willing to invest in himself and got way more, for him, it felt like way more value than what he invested in that. And it was a pleasure and an honor for me to be a witness to some of those changes. So there's just some of the ideas that are possible here. When we increase awareness, there's a lot of what he was working on and are able to unlock those new ways of being. As we move on here, I want to focus on kind of this next piece of the puzzle here, which is what I'm going to call communication flow. And so to think about this, I just want you to think about for a moment, how often in a work setting, when there's some sort of problem with what's going on, or something that didn't get done, and we chalk it up to it was a miscommunication, right? And the reality that it was a miscommunication may or may not actually be true, but we often go back to this idea of communication as a critical piece, or I wish that this got communicated to us. I wish I would have known this, or, on and on and on. How often do we point to communication issues in the workplace when we're frustrated with something or something doesn't go right? And so to help us visualize how we can improve individually as leaders in our communication flow, I want you to think about communication flow as like a river that's flowing, right? And on one side of the river, you have one bank, which is kind of this side of listening, right? And on the other side, it's sharing, and I would also add perhaps sharing with confidence and conviction, right? And different people have different struggles. Usually we lean one more or the other. Like I might be a high sharer, but I struggle listening. That's probably more true for me, right? I'm not as great at listening. In fact, I've gotten some very focused feedback in the past on that, right? But it's actually in the balance between these that we get in this flow channel, right? When we can both effectively listen to other people and have open minds and really consider their inputs and insights, and as leaders and individuals that we can effectively share with conviction and really believe what we have to share has value and merit, right? Instead of always just pushing it off to other people, right? And then the directionality of the channel, what might fuel the flow itself is also driven by kind of our purpose and our why, right? So it's kind of a fun model to think through. Where are you at? Where do you spend more time at, and where do you need to improve here? And so I want to ask that, and just another moment of introspection. Which side do you feel like you need to work on the most? I'll give you just a few moments. So this is either the listening or the sharing side, just one word or the other, and no correct answer other than just for you, right? But just trying to encourage your development along the way. So give you just another couple seconds here. We'll go 3, 2, 1, go. Right? So, oh, interesting. Someone said the why, the directionality, kind of that purpose side of things, but listening and sharing. Maybe we go more on the sharing side, but there's plenty of people who are with me and need to work on the listening side of things. So we'll talk about a few principles on both sides of this, but on the listening side, we'll start first. And there have been identified 5 different kind of levels of listening. This is, I'm borrowing this idea from Stephen R. Covey of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? And so think about, hey, we can ignore people, or maybe level 2 is we pretend to listen, but we're not really listening. Number 3 is selective listening. I only listen to what I want to listen to. This happens all the time in meetings, right? Oh, I'm going to perk up here, and other than that, I'm going to be doing the work that I'm doing because I don't really care about what anyone else is talking about unless it pertains to me, right? And then 4 is a lot of times what gets taught in even like listening seminars and stuff is attentive listening. Okay, you're giving eye contact. You're maybe even repeating back what people say, right, to clarify and make sure you understand. But the 5th level is kind of a more connected level of listening that we would want to aspire and get better at, and it's called empathetic listening. To use a quote from Dr. Covey, says that empathetic listening is so powerful because it gives you accurate data to work with. Instead of projecting your own autobiography and assuming thoughts, feelings, movies, and I think that actually might be motives and interpretation, you're dealing with the reality inside another person's head and heart. You're listening to understand. You're focused on receiving the deep communication of another human soul. Whew. How often have you been listened to by someone like that? And when's the last time you listened to someone like that? Right? Something to think about. But when you really feel like you're listening to a level of understanding the person, not just what they're saying. Okay. On the sharing side, when we share with conviction and confidence, this can, why do we need to do this? Why do we care about sharing effectively? Well, in a team setting, when we can do this, it helps create a sense of certainty, right? Conviction, when we're sharing, like we really feel like we know where we're going and why. That helps reduce fear and increase confidence in teams. It helps us to be decisive. Like, even if we're listening well, we still, especially as leaders or just leaders of our own life, we need to make decisions. No one else is going to make those decisions for us in a lot of circumstances. I find a lot of people struggle, myself included, a lot of times struggle to be decisive. We're often indecisive, right? And also is critical and be like, hey, I wish this got communicated to me. A leader's responsibility is to share frequently. We need to keep people connected to the why of what our team and organization is doing, and perhaps the what needs to happen. But we also want to trust and let other people take care of the how instead of prescribing that all the time, right? And so we talked about these kind of 2 sides, the listening and the sharing, both need to work together to get in that communication flow. Just another example, this is Zachary. He's a engineering business owner, someone else that I worked with. And one of the things that he worked with a lot on was his ability to communicate with others and with his team. And he was able to unlock a lot of opportunities and scale and grow his business, and continues to do so. And we're continuing to connect and work together on a number of things. So again, it's just exciting to see people identify these opportunities and then implement them in big ways. Moving on, the third piece here to this model of connected leadership is that of psychological safety. And maybe some of you might be aware of a big project that Google did. They did two. They did one on looking for the most effective leaders, and they did one on studying the most effective teams. And particularly on the team side, they identified 5 factors for the most effective teams. And by far, the number one factor that created the best teams was teams that had high levels of psychological safety. Okay, by far the most important dynamic. And they found that teams with high psychological safety, and this has been replicated in a lot of other studies too, were less likely to leave, so there's higher retention. They're more likely to accept diverse ideas from people on the team, actually delivered higher revenues and impact in their work. And they were seen, and the people in those teams were seen as more effective by other leaders. So the way that they came off to others was better, right? And so what is psychological safety? If you're unfamiliar, these are some things to think about. But what I found is that great psychologically safe teams look like this, where team members feel safe to take risks and speak freely. That doesn't mean that they always feel safe, like they can just kick it back, but they feel like they can take appropriate risks. And actually, interestingly enough, what this does is it encourages healthy conflict, right? This doesn't mean that we're avoiding conflict and we're not challenging each other. In fact, it's the opposite. Great psychologically safe teams, they're willing to challenge their leaders and each other because they're looking at, because they feel like that's the expectation. We expect a lot out of each other, so they're willing to challenge each other. It's not destructive. We're not trying to put other people down. We're doing that for the good of the whole team and of the organization. People in psychologically safe teams believe that others will support us in our work, and also just everyone is transparent with their strengths and weaknesses, and they're willing to share that. A lot of the early work and continued work on psychological safety was pioneered by a researcher by the name of Amy Edmondson. And you can go look at her. She's got books and TED Talks and stuff. But one of the great things for you to take a look at is there are 7 questions that she identified to help teams and individuals consider what's our level of psychological safety now. So you can kind of do a self-assessment, right? To consider, where am I at right now? I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but give you just a little bit of time to consider which of the, where would you rate things right now? How do you feel about your level of psychological safety on your current team or previous teams that you've been on, right? And so give you just a little bit of time to do that. And then I'm curious, again, just a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest level of psychological safety. How would you rate your current or most recent team that you've been on, right? So just throw out a number in the chat. We'll give you just a few seconds, won't take too long. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. Not seeing any 5s. I'm seeing anywhere from 1 to 3, right? So no one's perhaps thriving on the psychological safety side of things. So there's opportunities, right? And I see that not as like everything's bad, but this is just an opportunity for us to get better. This is exciting, and I think it's possible. Okay. And so going back to like what you can do about this, how can you do your part individually in your team, whether you're the leader or not, to encourage psychological safety? Number one, admit your own fallibility, right? You don't know everything, but you're willing to lead, again, with vulnerability, admit that you're fallible, you don't have all the answers, and you want to get insights from other people. Think of a person who might be able to help you with something, and admit that I don't have all the answers, and be willing to ask for that help. Number two is make clear to others why their voice matters. So encourage them to speak up. There are always people in teams that are not the people who immediately speak up, but we want to encourage them to speak up and share their insights and opinions, because if they don't, we're actually missing out on a lot of things at a team level. And then finally is to stop blaming. Blame has never helped much of anything, right? Like yes, we want to take responsibility, but blaming others does not help. So replace blame with curiosity, seeking to understand what is right, not who is right, perhaps, and seeking to understand and get to the root cause of challenges or problems when we have them. Okay, and so I'm going to move on here and just look at this model as a whole. We're talking about awareness and flow of communication, psychological safety, maybe harken you back to some images that might help you remember kind of the brain operating system, the flow of the river of communication, and the safety symbol here. But when you tie all these things together and put them all together, what I think is in the middle is connection and trust, right? And we can think about us being linked together beyond just our individual selves, but with the people that we work and interact with in a larger, more impactful way. Again, going back to trying to increase collaboration and innovation and productivity and things like this. I'm reminded of, this is not Stephen R. Covey, it's actually his son, Stephen M.R. Covey, recently wrote a book called The Speed of Trust, and found that extending trust and building trusting teams can improve speed, so our ability to innovate and deliver what we're trying to deliver faster, and cost goes down. When trust is low, speed is low, and cost is up. So which do we want to have, right? Do we want to have that higher trust or that lower trust environment? It's not too hard to do that math, right? I think trust and connection also can bring, again, collaboration, innovation, creativity, because people have that flow of being willing to have more ideas. Also, resilience, I think, is a big thing, both individually and collectively, as there are challenges and setbacks and problems along the way, as we will all have, but we're able to break out of those and continue forward, right? And it also encourages more learning, right? Because we trust and feel connected and share more information readily, so we're learning faster together. We're seeking to learn from our mistakes. All these things are possible when we can do all these things we've been talking about here. So putting this all together, just thinking about maybe on the action-oriented side, perhaps some actions that you might consider personally that you might be able to do. On the awareness, to build some more awareness, might seek to continue that activity that we started earlier and dig into that biggest change that you can make. And what might be that hidden commitment that's keeping you back from making the change that you want to make. On the communication flow side, I would invite you to make a decision and take an action to say, hey, do you need to listen more or improve your sharing or conviction more? And then find an opportunity today or by tomorrow, certainly, to practice that. Right? Find an interaction with someone, find a person that you need to listen to better, or that you need to share better, and practice that. Do something quickly here. And then on the psychological safety side, I invite you to find an opportunity to lead with vulnerability. How can you perhaps take a risk and see how that works out, or help someone else to do the same, to build that vulnerability in yourself and in those that you work with. And so again, just give you these little symbols here to remind you of what we were talking about earlier. So I really hope that you feel like I kept my promise. I gave you a promise earlier, for those of you who are here at the very beginning, that you would have some actionable insights and a framework to build some elements of your self-leadership and leadership in general here. So I really hope that you feel like I kept my promise. But another question here to consider here is, are you all good from here, right? Like I gave you a lot of, I hope, helpful information, but the answer might be yes and no, right? So if we think about Warren Buffett, one of the richest people on the planet, he could very simply explain investing in his investment philosophy in one sentence: buy low, sell high, and only invest in things you understand. Well, I can understand that quite easily, but I'm not a multi-billionaire quite yet. But it is perhaps the details that make the difference, right? And so it's the lesson here is that people who are committed to finding the answer so if you are committed to finding the answers, those are the ones who succeed, right? And even perhaps when things aren't looking great, but you're willing to do whatever it takes. So at this point, you might have some more questions as well. I've given you some answers and activities, but you might have more questions and more things to figure out, such as, how can I really identify what is the biggest change? I have some ideas, but how do I know what's really the biggest one for me to make right now? How do I break through and identify those hidden commitments that are holding me back? How do I actually improve my listening so that others trust that I really care? How can I grow in my conviction to communicate and share appropriately? How do I create environments of increased psychological safety for others? And in any of these topics, if there's a team or others that you want to implement these ideas with, how do you share these ideas with others and bring them along instead of just you trying to do this? And sometimes that can create some resentment. And I'm making these changes and no one else is changing with me, right? And perhaps everything else that you don't know. So perhaps you can figure this out by yourself, or I would love to talk to you and see if I can help further. What I found is that if people try and make these changes strictly on their own and go their own way with this, often little, if any, progress gets made. And so those who really make progress are the ones who are willing to invest in themselves and their teams, get accountability and support that they need, and take courageous action along the way. So if you individually or maybe in your organization want to improve on these things that we've talked about today, I've created some new service offerings for individuals and organizations who want to get serious about connected leadership. And this can take many different forms. This can take the form of individual coaching, can do group trainings and facilitations, it can do speaking and in different forms. And but obviously we need to discuss this and make sure that this feels like a mutual fit for you or your organization. I need to fit you and you need to fit right for me and my mission as well, and some of the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And so I want to give you all this opportunity to do that. So you have this choice, right? I love to go back to basic physics principles. One of Newton's laws of motion is that an object at rest will stay at rest unless it's acted upon by an outside force. Right. And so if you or your organization, for some reason, feel like you are at rest in some way, like this old cat here, different ways you might feel like you're at rest, feeling stuck or unable to make improvements, not sure how to motivate others, not moving the needle there, lack of alignment in your vision or goals and what you're doing. So maybe that purpose and that deeper level of why that you're struggling with, having struggles with communication, or seeing low collaboration and innovation in yourself personally or in your team, you can stay at rest, or perhaps we can have a conversation. We can perhaps work together and can be that outside force to accelerate your leadership progress now or in the near future. So here's what I invite you to do next. Invite you, if you want to have more discussions with this and figure out how we can personalize this for you, go to morethaneng.com/schedule-call, and I'll give you this link in the chat in just a moment. And what we're going to do is set up a time to chat one-on-one. You'll see my calendar availability, and we'll discuss your unique challenges and goals individually in your team, whatever we want to talk about. And if we're a good fit, we'll design a package specifically for your needs. and move forward and move through the transformation that I think is possible as all of us unlock that potential in each of us. So at this point, thank you for being here. You watched the entire presentation, you want to change and improve, and hopefully you feel like this is something you can get some help with. And so I just invite you all to do what works, not what doesn't, and get some training and support, even if it's not from me. But if you identify a change, again, trying to do that alone often doesn't work nearly as well. So get the support you need, even if it's not from me, if we're not a fit for some reason, and then just invite you to persevere and keep moving towards that deeper level purpose and motivation, what you're trying to become. And I really hope all of you try and do that. So at this point, I'm happy to have a few minutes here. We can go to the top of the hour or beyond to do some Q&A, and really want to give you some time to help answer any questions on the things that we talked about today. So, are there any questions here that I can help with to clarify on any of the topics, or anything else that's on your mind that perhaps I can help you with?
I liked the study you shared about psychological safety was made by Google. All their layoffs kind of went against their own studies.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and just because and isn't that interesting? Sometimes even when we have the right information, that doesn't mean we always do the right things to make it happen, right? So even if we have the answers, and so you might point at Google and say, hey, they did this study and they identified this, and if they're doing something, or layoffs or whatever, is that them being hypocrites? Maybe not, right? But having information and knowledge and implementing it are two completely different things, right?
It's true.
How
old was that study? Culture can change too.
Yeah, so certainly in the last 10 years, I forget exactly, and I think they actually continue to add to them. They've actually revised it. I was looking at it the other day. They've done multiple revisions of these studies, and like I said, there's two. There's one that they looked at leaders, and one that they worked at effective teams. But the realities of the study don't negate, for them, perhaps business realities and other things, and larger decisions that need to be made. So yeah, we can point fingers, but I'd be more, again, instead of pointing blame, if you're a part of an organization like that experienced layoffs or something, get to curiosity and say, hey, for me personally, how could I perhaps prevent something like this happening in the future if I have an opportunity to have an impact on that, and improve any teams that I'm working on if I didn't see things going well, right? Get curious about stuff like that.
But Jeff, I've got a couple of questions.
Sure, Michael, go ahead.
First one is, do you by chance have a link to where you're reading those Google studies that's shareable? Yeah,
so if you they've got them, I don't have them off the top, but if you Google the two projects, I think their names are called Project Aristotle and Project Oxygen, if I'm not mistaken. And they've got websites and resources and stuff that point to some of their findings, and some even suggested resources on how to perhaps implement some of the ideas inside of them as well, individually. Or so Jonathan looked it up. Rework.withgoogle.com, and it's got some good stuff there. So just threw that in the chat. Thanks, Jonathan, for looking that up. You have something else here, Michael?
Maybe others will relate. I was just curious, with your kind of Venn diagram, I was just thinking, if you're not the leader of a team and you're experiencing that it's less than the ideal of connected teaming or leadership,
right?
How do you influence that if you're not the leader yourself?
Yeah, so that's tough, right? Because certainly it would be easy to argue that the leader has perhaps the most influence on a team of setting the precedent and the level of connection and whatnot. But we go back to the idea of like we focus on what we can control and what we can't, right? Or I love the adage from the world of often quoted in like addiction recovery and like Alcoholics Anonymous circles, the serenity prayer, like, focus on the things that I, help me identify the things that I can change, courage to change, to accept the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So we can't expect ourselves to be able to change our leader or other people, right? But what can I take responsibility for, and how can I enable myself to encourage the connection in meaningful ways? So, for example, psychological safety or something, like how can you encourage another team member in a way that they at minimum feel safe with you to take a risk or share something that they might not otherwise share, right? Or even with your leader, like how can you model something or bring something up that might be difficult and share some ideas of ways to do that. Now they may or may not respond to that, but they're certainly not going to respond if you don't at least bring something up and have the conversation, right? So it goes back to affecting whatever change that we can, and then at least we can invite that change in others as much as we can. Is that helpful, Michael?
Yep. I think it was kind of like food for thought, because it's kind of like applying what you shared. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or questions here in the group?
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, this is Mitch.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, so I just, running through this, and I think it makes sense. Psychological safety is really easy to say. So I've worked in Scrum environments, and everyone's like, hey,
Yes.
we can talk about anything, guys. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Tell me everything that's wrong and we'll work on it. And then as soon as that question gets opened, people are either they don't believe it, so they don't actually say what they're thinking. Or if they do, it feels like it's quickly becomes a defensive conversation. Do you have any thoughts around, maybe some basic steps around, I think, looking at my past experiences, judging comes in really easily. It doesn't feel like it, but when maybe you're answering someone's concerns, you're saying, well, you're wrong and here's how you can fix it, even though you're just trying to be helpful. So any thoughts around how you shift a team mentality to really make that safe?
Yeah. So psychological safety is so big in that it needs to be modeled, and probably over and over and over again. Like you need to, it can take one time of breaking down that psychological safety to break down multiple attempts at actually doing it right, in a conversation or in a group, right? And so I'd probably go back to, I'm not going to scroll all the way back, but those 7 questions from Amy Edmondson, and kind of the behaviors of what's happening in teams, to kind of do a self-reflection, but also they're great suggestions of actions that you can take individually and in a team that need to be reinforced over and over and over again. Because yeah, you're right, Mitch, we can say it, but people respond to what actually happens more than what actually gets said, right? And so until we model it in meaningful ways, then people aren't actually gonna believe it. And so to a degree, well, so let me just give you a personal example. Okay. So a few years ago, when I was in my last corporate role, I was just starting an MBA program, right? And so I took a leadership class, and one of the things the class did we went through multiple assessments. And one of the assessments that I went through was actually one of those 360-degree assessments, right? Where I got feedback. I was leading a team, so I got, and these were all anonymous feedback. So it was probably about 12 people that evaluated me and my level of leadership and how I interacted with them on a number of different areas. And one of the key themes, probably the biggest key theme that came out of that, is that Jeff doesn't listen. And so that affects the communication flow piece, but it also affects the psychological safety, because one of the things that they more specifically said is that when they had ideas, I wasn't actually considering those because I was just going with what my thought process was and then forcing that on them, right? So obviously these different factors influence each other and interact. And that was hard, really hard feedback for me to take at the time, because it's not what I thought was going on, right? So there was some inner defensiveness, and it's also not what I wanted to be going on, right? Like that wasn't in line with my values and the kind of leader that I wanted to be, right? But it was the reality of what they were feeling. And so we had to have multiple conversations, and I had to share with them that I wanted to change, but I also had to invite them into the process to help me change. And so we had multiple reminders. I put a little sticky note that said "listen" on my laptop everywhere that I went, and we put it in our team area on the whiteboard. And I invited them that when I was acting not in accordance with that change that I was trying to make, that I encouraged them to call me out on that. And they didn't immediately, but over time they did, when they saw that I was trying to move through this process and I was in no way perfect, nor did I respond perfectly when they called me out on it, but they could tell that at least I was committed to trying and changing over time. And that commitment, that openness, and me admitting my fallibility along there at least helped us move the needle. And I still have a lot of work to do. But it was the beginning, I think, of a shift there. So there's maybe more of a personal example there, but hopefully that's helpful there for you and others, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Sure.
Yeah. I also, at least one-on-one would probably, at least if I think about myself and I put myself in what would make me trust, if I were like in a group and I were to ask feedback from a group or something, and people were start giving me like negative stuff, it gets very hard to not become defensive just because it's in a group setting.
Right.
And so the approach of how you ask for feedback can also hugely change the I don't know, the air. Maybe you could, the air on the how it's being received. Because for me, one-on-one, it's a lot more effective than getting.
Yes, and so I think there's a time and place for both of those, right? So some of those conversations it's best to be had at a group level, and some of those are best to be had at a one-on-one level, depending on the type of the communication, what you're trying to accomplish there together. So it depends.
Yeah,
which is not a very precise answer. But I think that both is the reality there, because there's some things that need to be experienced together as a group for everyone to be there. And again, some people but also everyone in the group is an individual, and so it needs to be both. So it's not even an either or, it's a yes and
right. The
approach.
I just know for me personally, the worst is when you get criticized in a group. It's always can always escalate quickly.
So if you are being called out, yes, I would highly suggest that happens at an individual level, if possible, instead of that being a public display.
Yeah, but you're right.
But if you're
situational.
self-deprecating yourself or being vulnerable yourself, then that can certainly happen, which is that can certainly happen in a group setting if you're doing that to yourself, but perhaps not to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, great thoughts here. Any other discussions or questions or thoughts here? Well, cool. So again, as we wrap up here, I want to thank all of you for being here. I really appreciate it. And it was fun to see some familiar faces and some new ones. And so I'll be following up with a couple things. I'll be following up with the recording for you, and then an invitation again to have a conversation with me if you want to get serious about this personally or with teams that you work with. We can have a conversation about ways that we could do that to move the needle in some of these meaningful ways to look at not from the principles, but also the implementation of how we can do that. So thanks again for being here. And I really wish all of you to have a fabulous week and rest of April, as we're almost headed into May here. And hopefully we can stay connected and help you in the future. So thanks so much, and hope to see all of you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Take care, everyone.